Hi, I'm Kathy Daneman, and on behalf of Mystery Writers of America, welcome to the 77th Annual Edgar Award Symposium. Tonight's discussion is with the nominees for Best Paperback Original. Our moderator tonight is Stephen Womack, and our bookseller is the Mystery Bookshop in West Dennis, Massachusetts. You can learn more about the Edgar Awards by following us on social media using the Edgar's 2023 hashtag or by visiting the websites mysterywriters.org and edgarawards.com. The Edgar Awards will be live streamed on our YouTube channel on April 27th. During tonight's discussion, I will be posting links to our panelists' books in the chat. Please support our authors and our local bookstore. And please feel free to submit questions in the Q&A box throughout the conversation, and we'll get to them at the end of the hour. Edgar and Seamus award-winning author Stephen Womack created the groundbreaking Music City Murders series, which was the first series to put Nashville on the map as a setting for the mystery genre. He is also the author of a number of other novels, including the New York Times notable book, Murphy's Fault. Womack holds the Master of Fine Arts in Writing degree from Southampton College of Long Island University. His latest novel, Fade Up from Black, The Return of Harry James Denton, brings Harry James Denton and the Music City Murders series back into print. Visit his website at stephenwomack.com. Thank you. Stephen?
Thank you, Kathy. All right. On behalf of the MWA, welcome to tonight's panel discussion with our 5 nominees for the Edgar Allan Poe Award in the category of Best Paperback Original. I'd like to start tonight by thanking my fellow jurors who join me in this effort, people who, the writers who are members of the MWA and choose to be on Edgar Award juries. Do so entirely voluntary. It's a volunteer position, unpaid position, and it's an important and very large task, as evidenced by the fact that in this year's pool of Best Paperback Original and ebook submissions, we had over 250 books to consider. The authors that are, and I want to thank Kathy Stoller, K.L. Murphy, Osma Khan, and Mark Zubro from joining me on that jury. And we had a very diverse and eclectic group of writers and mystery lovers who I think reflect the diversity and the inclusion of the mystery field in general, which is one of the most vibrant, energetic, and popular fields of writing in our culture today. I'm getting over the tail end of a spring cold. Our 5 authors tonight are joining us, and they have emerged as the pool of the best. I'd like to introduce them all, and then we'll kick off the discussion. Carole Lawrence notes in her bio that she has too many pen names. She's the author of 15 published novels, award-winning plays, musicals, poetry, and short fiction. Her physics play, Strings Attached, was produced off-Broadway in September of 2022 by the Pulse Theater. She's the winner of the Maxim Mazumdar Playwriting Prize, I hope I pronounced that right, and the Eve of St. Agnes Poetry Award, as well as the Chronogram and Jerry Jazz Magazine Short Fiction Prizes. A fellow of Hawthornden Castle and a 2-time Pushcart Poetry Prize nominee, she was featured composer at the Broadway Songbook at Lincoln Center. She has received grants from Poets and Writers and the New York State Arts Council. In another life, she was a professional actor, singer, and improvisational comedian. A self-described science geek, she likes to hunt wild mushrooms, ride horses, and enjoys playing Bach on the piano when no one is listening. And she is nominated for her novel, Cleopatra's Dagger. Max Allan Collins is an MWA Grand Master. He is the author of the Seamus Award-winning Nathan Heller historical thrillers, The Big Bundle, and the graphic novel Road to Perdition, basis of the Academy Award-winning film. His innovative 1970s series, Quarry, revived by Hard Case Crime, became a Cinemax TV series. He's completed 13 posthumous Mickey Spillane novels, Masquerade for Murder being one of them, and is the co-author with his wife, Barbara Collins, of the Trash and Treasures mystery series, including Antiques Carry On. He and Barbara live in Muscatine, Iowa. Max is nominated for his novel, Corey's Blood. Joe Hart is the Wall Street Journal best-selling author of 16 novels, including The River is Dark, Or Else, and The Last Girl. When not writing, he enjoys reading, the outdoors, and spending time with his family, and he is nominated for his novel, Or Else. Seraphina Nova Glass joins us as a professor and playwright in residence at the University of Texas in Arlington, Texas, where she teaches film studies and playwriting. She holds an MFA in playwriting from Smith College and is also an award-winning playwright. Seraphina is nominated for her novel, On a Quiet Street. Alessandra Torre is a multi-time Goodreads Choice nominee. Her books have hit the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and Amazon Charts bestseller lists. Over 1 million readers have enjoyed her suspense and romance novels in more than 30 countries. She is nominated for her book, A Familiar Stranger. So welcome to all of you. Congratulations. You are truly the best of the best this year, and we welcome you and celebrate you. So let's start by just kicking this off by letting the audience know a little bit about each of your books. And I'll go in reverse order. Alessandra, tell us about On a Quiet Street.
I'm a familiar stranger, but I'm happy.
I'm sorry.
It's all good. But
A Familiar Stranger, my bad.
that's all right.
I
I'll
noticed.
jump right in. A Familiar Stranger is a domestic suspense about a married mother who starts to live a double life, and that ends up leading to a murder. So that's what the book's about.
Great. Seraphina, On a Quiet Street.
Yeah, it's also a domestic thriller, and it follows 3 POVs of 3 women who live close enough on the same street where they can kind of spy on each other. And there's a hit and run. It kind of pops off with the hit and run. And each of these women have some dark secrets. And we find out throughout how the story intertwines that they all sort of help each other out in certain ways to unearth, sort of the big reveal at the end, and are really interconnected in each other's lives in hopefully unexpected ways.
Great. Joe, tell us about Or Else.
Yeah, so same domestic suspense / thriller, kind of set in a smaller town neighborhood. Main character has an affair with a neighbor who he went to school with. They were kind of childhood sweethearts, and she's married. He's not, but he's back home taking care of his dad, who's got early onset dementia. And shortly after they begin their affair, he receives kind of a warning to end their affair or else. And right after that, his love interest, her husband, is murdered, and she and her boys go missing. So that kind of kicks off the mystery, and he's got to kind of delve into just kind of all the twisted things going on in the background underneath this calm surface of his neighborhood. Yeah.
Great. Max, tell us about Corey's Blood.
Well, this is unusual because you don't usually see series entries. I think a lot of people involved in the MWA wonder why series entries so seldom get nominated. But I can tell you this is the 18th book in the series. So all you got to do is make it to 18, which is pretty hard in this particular milieu. But I created Corey at the University of Iowa Writers Workshop in 1971. And I did a little handful of paperbacks about the character. He was the first hitman character to be the protagonist in a series. And it developed a few years ago. I guess now it's almost probably 20 years ago. Hard Case Crime asked me to revive it. And I did. I took the opportunity to end the series and called it The Last Corey. And then the book did well, so I decided it wasn't the last one. And the next book I wrote was called The First Corey, where I went back and I started filling in the blanks. Well, now this book, Corey's Blood, it's very interesting to me because I used to always make him be my age. Well, I'm now at an age where you really can't market me very well. But I thought, what if I did a story about Quarry where he is about 70 years old? And I thought that would be interesting. And I would do a coda to the last Quarry. So I would do the real last Quarry. And the book is really about a beautiful young woman showing up at his door. He's retired. And I revealed he's been writing all the novels, by the way. I reveal that all these years he's the one who's been writing these first person novels, changing things around and probably making himself look better than there's no question he's an unreliable narrator. And so this lovely young woman shows up, and she's a true crime writer, basically turns out to be his daughter. And she's researched him. And it goes on from there. So there's that pairing of father and a daughter he didn't know he had, which is interesting because we all want to, I think we're in the business of creating questions and then seeking the answer as we write the novels. Somebody asked me a while back said, well, this must be a really great way for you to express what you think. And I said, no, it's how I find out what I think. If I want to express what I think, I'll write an essay. If I want to know what I think, then I write a novel, and by the end of the novel, I might have learned something about myself.
Great, great. Carole, tell us about Cleopatra's Dagger.
So it's a historical thriller, and the main character is a kind of a proto Nellie Bly character, actually working a little bit before, maybe about 10 years before Nellie Bly actually existed. So she's a female journalist who works for the New York Herald, which was, not the New York Times, but an extremely popular paper at the time. And she's on the L when she's pretty sure she sees a murder through a third-story window. And then a body turns up in Central Park where they're about to put Cleopatra's Needle. In 1880, Cleopatra's Needle was actually on the way, and but it hadn't been put up yet. So a body is found in Central Park, and she's working the society page, but she kind of she bribes her editor into putting her on the crime beat, and she gets to investigate this murder and a series of murders that follow. It takes place in New York. If I haven't mentioned already, the New York Herald, I guess it's pretty obvious.
Thank you. So now that our audience has had a smattering of the range of novels being written by you guys, the areas, domestic thrillers, historical thrillers, an homage in some ways to the hard-boiled era of mystery fiction, I'd like to find out what drew you guys, each one of you, to crime fiction in the first place. Did you set out to be a mystery crime writer? How did you grow up reading the classics of mystery fiction? What drew you to writing this kind of work in the first place? Or is it a matter, as I think it happens with some writers, they just started writing a story and only later discovered that it was mystery or crime fiction? So, Alessandra, you smiled. You take that one.
Sure. I've been wanting to write suspense since I started writing, but my first book, I started just writing a story, like you just said, Stephen, but it ended up being a romance. Excuse me, a romance. And I did not like romances, and I had never read a romance. And I ended up writing like 22 romances before I finally got to write what I really wanted to write, which was suspense. So I just found a lot of success in romance and got book deals, and before I knew it, that I was a romance writer. But I always read suspense novels ever since I was young. Every type of suspense, everything from amateur sleuth to slasher to horror to whatever. But once I finally was successful enough where I could dictate what I wanted to do, I said I want to shift and I want to write suspense. And I haven't, I haven't looked back. But that's how I ended up in suspense. After 22 romance novels, I finally got to write what I wanted to write.
Great. And we're going to explore that further a little later. Joe, what drew you to mystery and crime fiction? Is this something you've always worked in, or is this?
So, my first love was horror. So, I mean, that's kind of where I got my feet wet, writing more ghost stories, supernatural stuff, and Stephen King, Dean Koontz, Robert McCammon. Those are all kind of what I cut my teeth on when I was little. Probably way too young to be reading Stephen King, actually. But it was just kind of a natural progression or evolution for me, the suspense, and I liked the very much like the settings typically of a lot of suspense novels and mystery novels, because it just, a lot of those are very just typical and mundane, and I like that idea of things going on behind the background where everybody is acting one way and other things are happening, people are lying, shady things are going on in the background. I really liked that kind of that veil of normalcy, and then drawing it aside is what kind of drew me into the mystery and thriller genre. Whatnot. Yeah.
Great. Carole, what drew you to
What?
What drew you to this arena? What drew you to mystery and crime
Well,
fiction?
it's funny. I kind of came from a lit background in a way. I went to such a conservative school that we didn't just read dead white males, we read dead white British males. I think there was like one course on American history, and it was taught by the drama teacher. And or in American literature, there was like, but all the rest of it was like Augustan poetry and the novels of Thomas Hardy and that kind of thing. But when I was a sophomore, I discovered Conan Doyle, and I used to sneak down into the stacks of the Duke Library and like look up Sidney Paget's original pictures and drawings of Sherlock Holmes, and I think I was sort of crushed out on both Watson and Holmes. And so it was actually a very erotic experience. And then later on, I was lucky enough to be asked to write a couple of Holmes novels by St. Martin's, because I'd had some short stories and some anthologies. And so my life of crime was well on its way. And also it pays a lot better than poetry. I think I've made a total of $250 writing poetry.
I can't decide if that's a comment on poetry or on mystery fiction, because the motto of the Mystery Writers of America is crime doesn't pay enough. So
yeah, well, I hate to think what the Poet Society they wouldn't even go there, So
exactly. Seraphina, as a
Yeah,
playwright,
playwriting. Well, I can't handle anything scary, really, or gratuitous violence or horror at all. So that's why this is a little funny. But, give me all the 2020 and Dateline where somebody's trying to poison their husband with, all the antifreeze that they can find. And that's more my kind of crime. It already happened. So then we go behind the scenes to find out how. I think as a playwright, spending 3 months writing the play, writing it, then 3 months getting actors together and all the collaborative, the lights, the sound, the director, to have 6 people show up in the audience is very thankless, and it wears on you really quickly. And as much as I still love the theater and teach theater, it's a tough road. And I was actually at directing a play where I teach, and it's a little bit of a commute. So I was listening to my first thriller book ever in 2019 in October on my commute. And while I was listening to it, I just said, I'm going to do that. And then I just did that, and here we are. Still, I'm a newbie for sure.
Okay.
I just want to say I'm excited that you're a playwright, Seraphina. Maybe we can talk at the.
Yeah, I saw that in your bio, and I was thinking, wow, you don't meet many very often, so for sure.
Sorry, I just wanted to throw that in. Yeah.
Oh no, anybody jump in anytime. Max, I think you made reference earlier to being at a certain age. And I bring that up only because I'm right there with you. But you perhaps, I would speculate, have been in this game longer than your fellow nominees. So you have a long career in crime and mystery fiction and in writing films and the whole gamut. What drew you to it? Did you set out to be a mystery writer?
Well, it was my mother's fault. I was reading a lot of comic books at an age in an era where you're not supposed to read comic books. And I was like, I'm talking 6 years old, 7 years old. And my mom said, you know, the comic strip I really liked when your dad was in the service and I was living in San Diego was Dick Tracy. And so they were reprinting the Dick Tracy stuff in comic books at that time. And that was some of the most violent, crazy violent stuff you could ever imagine seeing, and villains that were grotesque. And I mean, she would definitely be called upon by social services today. But thank God that she introduced me to Dick Tracy. I ended up writing Dick Tracy for 15 years in the newspapers, and so I then discovered Carole Sherlock Holmes, because Tracy was sort of the American Sherlock Holmes, the hat and the coat and all that stuff. And then right then in my when I was 10, 11, 12 years old, that's when all the TV was filled with Private Eyes. There was a craze. It's probably nothing anybody here but you, Stephen, can remember. But first it was Westerns, and then it became Private Eyes.
Yeah.
And most of them were
70s
based
and
on
the 80s, the great era of television episodic Private Eyes.
This is 1950, probably started around 1958 and went to about 1962, and was Peter Gunn and 77 Sunset Strip. But also it was Perry Mason,
Yeah.
Earl Stanley Gardner, right? The Thin Man, Dashiell Hammett. There was a Philip Marlowe TV show. Almost all of these things came from books. And I was the kind of kid who, if I saw a movie or a TV show and it was based on either history or a book, I had to either read the history or read the book. And that introduced me to these great writers, Hammett, Chandler, and Mickey Spillane. And that's where I way younger than I should have been reading Mickey Spillane, like 12. I actually had to lie about my age to buy the first one. But I was fascinated by, I'm sure it was the sex and violence, but it was the noir poetry that I think really, really drew me in, that mood. And the other thing, I think, as writers, I didn't know this then, obviously, I was just a kid, but as writers, we know how important conflict is. I mean, there isn't a story without a conflict. And well, if you're doing a mystery or a thriller, somebody got stabbed, somebody got shot, somebody got poisoned, at least they got robbed. Something happened that was a conflict. And once you give us a conflict, away we go.
I just say that I've had students argue with me that you can have a book without conflict. It's a really interesting classroom argument.
Are they flunking?
Yeah.
Tell them to go write some poems.
Carole, I want to mention to you that when at the University of Iowa, where one of the reasons I went there was because Kurt Vonnegut was teaching there. And then the year I got there, he just left, but he came back and read to us from his book in progress, which was called Slaughterhouse-Five.
Wow.
But he told us that that there's a great resentment between the fiction writers and the poets, and the fiction writers resented the poets because the poets were always between works.
So actually, you touch on something, Max, that I'd like to explore now, which is, and several of you mentioned being drawn into the mystery and crime fiction field by Sherlock Holmes, Conan Doyle, the classic era of the early mysteries, Agatha Christie,
Absolutely, Christie.
The Agatha Christie, Earl Stanley Gardner, and I was a huge Raymond Chandler fan myself, and came fairly late in life to Mickey Spillane. I read my first Mickey Spillane novel when I was teaching a class in film noir, and we screened "Kiss Me Deadly," and I thought, I'm teaching this film, I ought to go read the damn book. And I loved it. I fell in love with it. And so, but my question is, tracing how the mystery and fiction genre has evolved and changed over time. And I think in our lifetimes, we've seen massive changes, and more, the mystery and crime genre seems to be expanding exponentially now. Like 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you would have never heard the term that a couple of you have already deployed, domestic thriller. That is now a subset of mystery and crime fiction. I think it's safe to say we live in a pretty crazy world these days. What are the challenges to you guys as writers wanting to explore new and fresh ideas, to mine your own consciousness and your own imaginations, to come up with new stories? What's the hardest part about it nowadays, given, frankly, how crazy the world is these days? I turn on the national news every night and I see a story going, you can't make this up. I couldn't write this story, but it's real. So I'd like
Every time a newscaster says that, you can't make this up, I always want to say, oh, yes, you can.
Yes, you can. Yeah, you can.
I'm so tired of them saying that.
But it would take somebody special, of a special talent, to make it believable. So I'd like to hear how you guys respond to that, with the apparent rampant insanity in the world these days. How does that stretch you as writers, Joe?
I mean, I can't remember who said it. It's like, difference between reality and fiction. Fiction has to make sense, right? Like that's the whole thing. So I would say that's part of it. I mean, talking about especially villains lately, the cartoonishness of villains in real life is getting annoying, because I don't want to hear any notes back from my editor be like, well, we need to like dial this villain back because maybe they're not believable or whatever. And it's like, okay, all right, has anybody looked around lately? This is real life. I'm writing way more real life than real life. I would say that you want something relatable that I think people can look around and say, yeah, that's something that I've seen or I've noticed or that I've dealt with. But then still, draw them in and have a little bit of a spectacle, have something that catches their attention and kind of sets them back on their heels and, wows them a little bit. So I think drawing that balance is kind of tough sometimes, is having enough spectacle where people, they really want to keep reading and it's really intriguing and it enamors the reader. And then also having, enough grounding where they believe it's, no suspension of disbelief or very little, as much as you can get away with, that type of thing. So that's what I'm thinking. So. Yeah.
Well, you watch the news tonight and there's the willing suspension of disbelief, and then there's tossing it out the window. So, Alessandra, how does that affect your work with the current climate in the world, the apparently chaotic and insane nature of the world these days?
For me, it's just more inspiration. I mean, it's just more ideas, there's so much great TV now that there used to not be. And I get a lot of inspiration. Like I'll watch a show like Succession or something like that. And it's like, oh my gosh, I just want to plan, a serial killer in the middle of this. Right. And there's a book so I don't mind it. I mean, I mind it in terms of how crazy the world is. But in terms of books and ideas, there's a lot of fodder out there right now. And real life is often crazier than fiction. And there's just so many. It used to be like the only thing I could watch was Forensic Files or something like that. And now, I have so many different documentaries and great dramas and things like that. And I'm trying to learn a lot from television in terms of how stories are told and how hooks are put in and planted and that sort of thing. So for me, it's been great creatively.
I think it's a sign of the times that there's a TV channel which is just wall-to-wall Forensic Files. Yeah. I'm like, what do I want tonight? Forensic Files is fine.
If anything, it's harder for me. Technology is harder with cell phones. There's just a lot of plot. You can read a book that was written 20 years ago and, it would be much easier for someone to be stranded or, for them not to be aware of something. Nowadays, it's like, why wouldn't they just Google that, or look that up? So there's no reason why she wouldn't know that this guy she's dating used to be a serial killer, so that's harder for me, is overcoming the technology aspect, which could solve so many of our, miscommunications or plot.
Well, that opens a door, Alessandra, that we can walk through, especially in the last couple of months with the emergence of Chat GPT and emerging AI. I have a friend who's a writer who now uses artificial intelligence to generate blog entries. He's not writing fiction yet, but he's writing. And then he goes and polishes them. But the ever evolving, rapidly evolving technology in the world today, how does that affect your work? Do you worry about, for instance, Carole, a novel that you wrote now, by the time it's published in 18 months, might be dated because technology will have moved past it? I mean, do you worry about that kind of thing?
Actually, right now I'm writing historical fiction, so I'm like, yay, no cell phones. But yeah, for sure, like with I mean, the play that I just did was about physics, and I'm like, it could be that string theory will be dead 6 months from now. So I mean, I think it's always a worry. I think it was I don't know if it was somebody at MWA or thriller writers who said one time in a panel that the cell phone was the worst thing to ever happen to crime writers. And I think that's so true. I think I worry more about that kind of thing than I do about, I keep getting emails about AI and, from MWA and thriller writers, and they're like, hey, we're going to show you how this is going to impact you. And I'm like, no, don't think so. Hope to die before then, actually. Really, I'm serious.
I've been doing a lot of historical novels for the last about 30 years, although I do recent history. The Nathan Heller novels are all about famous crimes that were unsolved or controversially solved. Things like, the Lindbergh kidnapping and the Huey Long's assassination and so on. Things that I can take my private eye character and insert him believably into it. And then I don't have to worry about cell phones and the internet. And I mentioned quarry earlier. This is the first time I've really done a contemporary quarry in the last couple of years, where quarry is like I think he's 69 or 70 years old. But because this series was started in the mid 70s and shut down, and they asked me to pick it up, and then we had this sale to Cinemax where they did it in period. So I went back and wrote, when I was filling in the blanks of the stuff that happened that I hadn't reported on, it was all set in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And so I had no trouble with that. So I just kind of blundered into that gift of not having to deal with cell phones, because it's a pain. It really is a pain. But just recently I revised something. It was a screenplay they wanted to see, and I thought, oh God, I wrote this 20 years ago. So I read it through real fast. All I had to do was change the pager to a cell phone. That was it.
Well, I've got an out of print novel that was published in the mid 90s that I'm bringing back into print, and it involves cyber espionage, and it involves a bank whose entire clientele is maintained on a hard drive that's a 10 megabyte hard drive. And my iPhone has 150 times the storage of that back then. So that's being published as a historical as well. Seraphina, in your work, do you deal with these issues? Do you grapple with this?
Technology is, I feel like it's helped me a good handful of times too. Like, it was really helpful for this guy's Fitbit to indicate time of death. And I was like, oh, that's the way to do it. But then you're right. I'm thinking, in 2 years, is anyone going to know what a Fitbit is? And how's that going to work? But you'd be surprised how many times I've called T-Mobile to ask them really ridiculous questions. Like, if it pings off this tower in this area and my husband dies and I need to know, whatever was on his phone, is it going to show me a zip code or the tower that it pinged off of, and how wide is? They think I'm up to something. I mean, the research of really the forensics, so you don't overlook something and you're consistent and accurate with some, just have her leave the phone at home when she's burying the body, so we don't have to worry about towers. It's little things like that that you realize you really have to think through, and it does make it a big pain most of the time. It's tougher to get away with things and have people get away with murder, for sure. But yeah.
Great. Let's shift gears slightly. I have a feeling that in our audience there are probably a fair number of not only mystery fans, but aspiring mystery writers, and maybe successful mystery writers as well. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the state of the industry. I think it's fair to say that publishing is, like everything else in life today, is changing exponentially from week to week. We've gone from, I know, Max, back when you started before I did, but I came into print in the very early 90s, 1990 actually. At the time, there were, still 15 or 20 publishers in New York City, and now there are 5 or something like that. Is it the big 5, the big 4? Have they gone down even further in the last week? So for an aspiring writer, somebody who wants to get into this as a career, what are some of the challenges? What are some of the opportunities? At the same time, we've seen traditional publishing in many ways become less and less an essential component of a publishing career. Other avenues have opened, but that has challenges as well. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. Max, the veteran, we'll start with you.
The two things that strike me the most are a lot of the publishers, not that there are a lot of publishers, but sometimes there are small publishers within these bigger units. I notice now that series are not given any time to develop. And even in recent years, it was like it was 3 books and out. 3 books and out. If you haven't scored with, and this is particularly series, but it also applies to writers of thrillers. If you haven't started creeping up on Harlan Coben, great guy incidentally, but I'd like to see something on Netflix that wasn't based on one of his books someday. This is a real problem, because Rex Stout wouldn't have worked if he'd not been able to develop over the years. And when they asked him to do another Nero Wolf, he never could come up with one. That was it. That was his. And I think it's disgusting that they don't stick with a series and develop it, nurture it, look for talent, nurture talent, work with talent, not say, oh, here's something that might work. Let's throw this into the marketplace. That's just infuriating to me, and I think it's really bad for the popular culture. The other thing that annoys me quite a bit, you can tell I'm not easily annoyed, but what annoys me quite a bit is editors and readers and reviewers that can't tell the difference between a character's opinions and the author's opinions. And this really, I mean, if everybody in the book has to be nice, who the hell did the murder? It's a weird political correctness thing, and I have run into this for probably 30, 40 years. If I was doing a Nathan Heller book set in the 1930s and he said, and someone said colored, that's what they would have been saying. Okay. And, I'm sure Carole has run into the same thing too, where that is part, anachronistic dialogue is this Perry Mason show that they have on, which is quite well done in many respects, is filled with anachronistic dialogue. Shit show, throwing shade, these things, that just ridiculous things that they're saying in 1934. And this week, Della Street, the secretary, got up and did the cross-examination. In 1933 or 1934, Los Angeles, this happened. Wishful thinking is one thing, but make your points, but you've got to be able to do characters that are at home in their era, and you have to be able to do unsympathetic characters. You have to be able to do racist characters. You have to be able to do sexist characters, and you have to be able to do smart ones and stupid ones, and every kind of character that you know how to do, you should be able to do.
Just to answer your question just very quickly, I do have a small anecdote about Cleopatra's Dagger where I describe a character as dressing like a gypsy. My editors tried really hard to talk me out of that word. And finally, I just said, oh, hell, it's a fashion statement. Get over it. She looks like a gypsy. I wasn't saying, she was traveling in a caravan and robbing people. And, she just is dressed colorfully. And I rarely fight with editors because it usually doesn't pay. But in this case, I was like, I want that word, gypsy stays.
Yeah.
So,
Good for you.
yeah, that kind of
Good
thing
for
happens
you.
all the time in historical fiction.
Yeah.
On that note, Max, I had a battle with Ruth Cavan at St. Martin's Press once in a book. The first couple of novels were set in Louisiana, and I had one character refer to another character as a coon ass. And of course, if you're from Louisiana,
Yeah.
you know that has nothing to do with race. A coon ass is a Cajun. A coon ass
And
is,
it's an affectionate term.
and it's an
A
affectionate
lot
term
of them are very proud of being a kuna.
of
Yeah.
being a coon
Yeah.
ass.
Yeah.
And I lost that battle. I didn't win that one. I lost that. So, Alessandra, I know you work with a lot of aspiring writers. Your conference, inkers.con, which is coming up, I believe, brings in a lot of aspiring and younger neophyte writers. What do you tell them about the state of the industry these days? How a career path for writers has changed?
Well, it's not easy, but it's never been easy, right? It's just different types of struggles. So right now it's saturated. And a lot of that is, we are dealing with two different business models. And I'm not sure how many of the authors on this call are self-published. I might be the only one, but I started off being self-published. And prior to my current run of books with Thomas and Mercer, I would always say that my greatest success was through self-publishing. My self-published books outsold my traditionally published books 10 or 20 to 1 anytime I hit the New York Times list. It was with self-published books. So I'm a huge advocate for self-publishing. I never would have become an author if I had to query and find an agent and find a publisher. I just had no confidence in my own writing. So self-publishing is a very viable option for a lot of authors, especially if you don't have the confidence or the time frame, and if you do want to just write a story that you want someone to read. So I would just encourage any author to explore all options and not necessarily sign with who they see as a traditional publisher, because there are also a lot of predatory publishers out there, and there are a lot of smaller presses that will really take advantage of aspiring authors. But before you sign anything, you should never pay a publisher to publish your books. And even if it's not a pay per, look at a contract and really weigh your options before you go with a traditional publisher. Don't go with a traditional publisher just because you think you need that, because there are great options with self-publishing, and for some authors that's the right option. For some, it's not.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I'm of an age where I came to my awareness of wanting to be a writer in the late 60s and the early 70s. And this was at a time when the term self-publishing had an enormous stigma attached to it.
Yeah.
That if you published yourself, the vanity press,
Right.
Vanity Press.
and it was talk about predatory back then. They literally took advantage of gullible people who had aspirations of being a writer, and there was no way in hell you were ever going to get anywhere taking that route. I prefer the term indie publishing, and I think the indie publishing movement in the world now is ultimately going to remake what writers can do. Joe, I saw you hold your hand up. What's your experience in this arena?
Yeah, I mean, that's how I started out with self-publishing. Same thing. I getting an agent seemed like a insurmountable thing to me when I started writing, and the task of doing that was just, I didn't feel like I could do it. So I was a little late getting into, like, when Kindle came around. I was a year or two after that kind of really big takeoff. But it was still a great time to get in. And before, like we were talking about, market's kind of becoming saturated, where now I think it's just a lot of books being published constantly. There's a ton of books, tons of writers, which I think is great for people that are able to, find, get their stories down and express themselves and, get their work out there. But yeah, it was a good way to get, your feet wet and get your foot in the door as far as learning the ropes about how to produce a book and kind of everything that went into that. It kind of prepared me a little bit too for when I got a more traditional publishing deal and then got an agent and started dealing with multiple editors and things like that. So that's kind of how I did, which like Alessandra was saying, that it's each person, it's going to be different for them and their goals. I think that's the biggest thing I could say to like newer writers or beginning writers is figure out your goals, what your goals want to be. I mean, everybody wants to be a New York Times bestseller and have millions of dollars and all that, but is it probable? Probably not. But can you make a living off of it? Sure, you can make a living off of it, or you can do it part-time, or you can do it as a hobby. But figure out what your goal is with the writing and whatnot. And I think that can shape a lot of your decisions too. So yeah.
Yeah. Seraphina, as a teacher, do you get confronted, not confronted, are your students interested in, do they come to you with questions like this on the state of the industry and how do you break in and how do you get started? What do you tell them?
I work more with actors. It's a similar approach as far as auditioning and a really insurmountable feeling of making it in a world of, in film and theater. But, I think what Alessandra said so interesting, because I agree and then feel the opposite. I have no confidence to self-publish because I would have no idea where to begin. And it seems so much scarier than just sending it and saying, please do this for me. I don't know what to do. And so I got really, I'm so new. I debuted in 2020. You can imagine how much fun the spring of 2020 debut was. But, I did get an agent, within a couple of weeks of sending out the queries. And then since then they've done, with a few weeks after that, we had like a, multi-book deal with the publisher I'm still with. So, and I'm going on book 5 now. I think that was, to me, I feel like it was a lot of luck. I mean, granted, I've been writing in other capacities, but to give advice, and I was asked even today, a couple strangers emailed me. I feel like a little bit of a jerk giving advice around that, because there does seem to be a lot of sort of right time, right place, right time involved with it. But I'm not active on social media, and I would never know how to market myself. I'm from the Midwest. I just apologize for myself most of the time. And it's not my nature to like put myself out there and promote my book. I do as much as they kind of make me. But it seems sort of horrifying to be responsible for the success of my book by myself. So I kind of let everyone else, I sort of aspire to do that one day. But I sort of let everybody else kind of take the reins in the areas that I don't know how to do. So I just get to write the next thing and not worry about that side of it.
Right.
As far as that being advice, it's not good. I don't really know. I don't have a lot else to offer because I just don't have the experience quite yet with anything else.
Well, that leads into I didn't mean to. Who did?
I want to just mention that one of the things, if you're lucky enough to have some fans, some readers that are really dedicated to reading you, they often do turn out to be aspiring writers, and they will ask you what to do. And the problem is everybody here has had a different path, and what you have to have is the determination to find a path, and take it. And they'll this is like when they ask you what time of day do you write and what kind of paper do you use and what kind of computer do you, as if there's a magic, if you can just put the right elements together, then you'll be able to do this. And I will say to them, I can tell you how how to get published in 1971. I can tell you that you should be 19, get in the writer's workshop, be lucky enough to have a mentor there who gets you an agent, and then yeah, go for it. But that path isn't there right now, and that's the only path I know, because it was the one I took. And I honest to God think, if you can, anybody who can be discouraged, I don't really want to encourage anybody. First of all, I don't want the competition. Okay. Second of all, if they can be discouraged, they should be,
Yes.
because this is not a fun life. I mean, I've been doing this for 50 years, and I am still looking for the next gig. It never, if you're not an airport type author, it can be over the next day. And my career's been over probably 3 or 4 times, and I had to claw my way back through. But Steve would tell you, if he looks back, there were plenty of people bigger than me who are gone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or, excuse me,
Max,
gone.
I think what you said about discouragement, I think you're sort of reiterating something that Flannery O'Connor said, which was along the lines of, people say nowadays too many young writers are discouraged. I believe we don't discourage enough of them.
He went to the University of Iowa too. She was at the
I
Writers'
think it was
Workshop, I
O'Connor who
believe.
said
Was
that. I'm pretty sure.
it William Faulkner who said
I
in the
think.
Paris Review interview, if anything can discourage you from writing, let it. So
Well, the great Faulkner story, which is probably apocryphal, is that they flew him into the big, to talk to all the assembled writers, and paid him a ton of money. And he got up and he said, "How many of you? This is the keynote speech. How many of you want to be writers?" Everybody raised their hands. Then why the hell aren't you home writing? And he sat down. That supposedly happened. I don't know if it did. If it didn't, it should have.
I don't know. I have been, we're going to run short of time here in a little bit. I've been asked to remind the audience that if they have a question, put it in the chat box. And I have a couple of questions that are live right now to follow up on this discussion. How do you reach an audience with self-publishing? How do you do that?
Good question.
Good question.
I can jump in on that. It's a question that would take like a gazillion hours. So I'll try to do my best in 3 sentences. The retailer algorithms are really, really strong right now. So if you write a story that appeals to readers and a high percentage of people who click on that book, purchase that book, your audience will grow exponentially. But it really involves knowing the market and writing to market and making sure that that book is packaged to market. And so that is the and not outpricing yourself or putting yourself in, so that really is the key, is to, if you can nail the packaging, and then you've written a story that matches that packaging, and you can generate high reviews and a high number, then you will find success. But it's not easy. It's similar to posting a video on social media. Some videos go viral, some don't. It's kind of about just the right magic ingredient. That's the quickest I can do to answer that question.
I know to some writers, the idea of writing to market is just anathema to them, that, and of course the market changes so quickly, but other thoughts, jump in.
Well,
I always discourage my students from self-publishing, and I can barely bring myself to promote my book on social media as it is, even though I have a publisher behind me. Because like Seraphina, I'm from Ohio. I mean, I'm from the Midwest. I don't know what state, but I'm from Ohio. And I too feel very apologetic about any self-promotion. So I feel like that it's a special type of person, and I am not that person to do that.
Well, I don't want to spend my time marketing my book. I want to spend my time telling stories. That's what it was put here for. And Seraphina, you're brilliant, but you lost me at algorithm. Okay. I know it's my loss.
Alessandra.
Yeah, Alessandra.
Alessandra.
And I know that's my weakness. I understand that that's gonna hurt me, but I don't text either. I'm sorry, I just don't do any of that stuff.
To follow up on what Alessandra said, the one good thing I think that writers who are considering indie pubbing, self-publishing, is there has never been more information out there on the process, on the business. than there is now. And if you're willing to do the work, what it really means is you're not just a writer, you're a publisher as well. And I'm down to, before I became published and started writing, I worked in publishing, and I worked in, not editorial, I worked in art departments. And so I know how to typeset books. And now that I'm moving towards indie pubbing, just the fact that I know how to typeset books has helped a lot. So, get out there. There are paid courses, free courses, a million YouTube videos on how to make this process work. And it's if you don't have the resources and don't have the money, then sweat equity works just as well, I think. I'm
not against this, by the way. I'm just not going to play in that. That's not the sandbox I want to play in. But I'm not against it, and I've seen it work, and I admire the people that make that work. I really, really do.
I have a question here. Carole, what draws you to period stories?
Well, lack of cell phones. I know, for me, it's all about location. And I just like when I was at Hawthorne Castle and a writing resident. I was a fellow. I love saying I was a fellow of Hawthorne, and that was really the first time I spent time in Edinburgh, and I just from dawn till dusk I roamed that city, and I just felt like history was seeping out of every cobblestone, and so that's when I sort of seriously started writing historical fiction. And I think for me, it's all about the place itself and the set. I love time travel, and I love the idea of going back and reliving the history of a place. And how people lived before me. And I've always loved old houses. I've always loved old things. I like clothing better if it's been worn once. I'm not kidding. I love things with history and a past. So I think it's kind of natural then to be interested in historical fiction.
Stephen, when I started tried to learn to be a private eye writer, and then the private eye market went away. And so I was trying to find a new way to do this. And I was teaching at a community college and was teaching them the Maltese Falcon. And I opened the book, and on the indicia page, it said copyright 1929. And my brain said, oh, Al Capone and Sam Spade were contemporaries. And that changed everything for me. Because once I knew that I could write in period, and that I could also write about actual history, that it was history now. Now it was history. And that it hasn't made me $1 million, but it's, Road to Perdition did okay. So going this direction has worked really well for me.
Great. I've just gotten something in the chat box. We have about 2 minutes left. So one last go around the table. What's next for you? What can your audience look forward to? What can your readers and fans hope to get next? In the corner, Alessandra.
A Fatal Affair is coming in June, and it's a Hollywood, set in Hollywood about a serial killer and a movie star and his twin brother who may or may not be involved in the crimes.
Great. Let's just go around the boxes. Seraphina.
My book, The Vanishing Hour, comes out May 30th, followed by The Vacancy in Room 10, which shockingly already comes out in January right after that. The next one, Vanishing Hour, is a little less domestic thriller, maybe a little on the darker side, not too dark. Still 2020 Dateline kind of dark, but I'm really excited about that one. So 6 weeks out.
Great. Carole.
I like Dateline 2020 dark. That's my kind of genre. In fact, I think that should be a genre. That should be a new genre. We should talk about Dateline genre. Sorry. I'm working on a book called The Dickens Affair, in which Charles Dickens gets involved with a young constable, well, actually a young detective in the London police, and because Dickens himself is pretty sure that a body that's washed up is in fact a murder. And I don't have a publisher yet, but here's hoping.
Max.
My wife Barbara and I, as Barbara Allen, have an antiques mystery coming out in the fall called Antiques Faux, the faux being a pun on FOE and FAUX. And I also have a Mike Hammer coming out called Dig Two Graves. And kind of the big book for me is a book called Too Many Bullets, in which Nate Heller straightens out what really happened in the pantry where Robert Kennedy was shot.
Ooh, okay.
That's Hard Case Crime in, I think, October.
Fabulous. Joe.
I have a new book out right now that's in Kindle First Reads. It's called Where They Lie, and that's kicking off kind of a new series for me with a main character who is a Child Protective Services worker investigating a family who died in a mysterious plane crash. So that's on sale right now.
That's a great title.
Love it.
Great
This-
title. Everybody's title's great,
I know.
but that's a great title.
Oh, wonderful. Can't wait to see these. Boy, this has been great fun. I'm looking at the clock and I think they're going to cut us off soon. You can learn more about the Edgar Awards by following us on social media using the hashtag Edgar's 2023 or by visiting the MWA website, mysterywriters.org or edgarawards.com. And this has been great fun. It's such a pleasure meeting you for the first time. Some of you seeing you again. I've enjoyed it very much. And thank you for joining us here. For all the people who are watching us on YouTube live stream, thank you for sticking with us. Go out and buy these folks' books.
Stephen, nice job, Stephen.
Steve, great job. Thank you, Steve, so much.
I enjoyed it very much, and I look forward to reading you all again and seeing you all again. And thank you very much. Now, I don't know what